So our next breakout session is going to be with Daiara Tukano, and the title is "What Are Indigenous Concerns About Globalization of Ayahuasca?" So this breakout session reviews the diverse Indigenous views and concerns about the globalization of ayahuasca, and asks for open and respectful hearing and the discussion. Since 1630, when the Yepá Mahsã people, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, better known as the Tukano, made contact with the Portuguese, the medicinal plant kahpi, classified as the Banisteriopsis caapi by Richard Spruce in 1851, has passed from demonization to globalization. Today, Indigenous people who know and practice the uses and knowledge of ayahuasca are a minority compared to its global consumption. The Indigenous Ayahuasca Conference, held in Brazil over the last 3 years, have brought together numerous Indigenous spiritual leaders to debate strategies to protect and strengthen cultural heritage of each people, manage planting of the medicines, and guarantee the right to ceremonial practices, combat the criminalization of ayahuasca and shamans, and address the growing concerns with the good use of medicines and with the economy that has sprung up around them, both in the countries where ayahuasca is legal and where it is illegal. This breakout session will discuss the paradox of globalization of ayahuasca as simultaneously represent the major opportunities and threats to Indigenous peoples. Several questions emerge from the discussion. How can we mediate the different paradigm conflicts that are emerging around the globalization of ayahuasca? And how can we ensure respect for the rights of the people who represent the original custodians of the medicine? And is it possible to form supportive alliance? If so, and how? So welcome, Daiara Tukano. Really excited to have you here. And I just want to make a little plug for question and answers for folks. So we have questions from the other session. So if you drop a question in the chat room, might get lost. We ask you to use the ask the question function, and maybe just put Daria's name next to the question so I can skim through that a little bit more. So welcome. I'm really excited to have you here.
Hello, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really happy to be here, and it's a really important discussion. So I'd like to present myself first. My name is Daiara. I am from the Yepá Mahsã nation that is most known as Tukano people. Of course, Tukano is a name that was given by the white people, so we don't use it that much. And our nation is the one of the first who had this contact of ayahuasca with the Western civilization. The first contact we had was in the 1600s, but it was only by the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century that the first botanicals, as Richard Spruce, who got contact with the kahpi. Kahpi is how we call the vine in our nation, and then it was called Banisteriopsis kahpi by the botanicals. I like to refer to this moment as the beginning of a very complex process of globalization. Even during the most part of the 20th century, in our region, in Brazil, in the Brazilian side, because we have Tukano family in Colombia and Venezuela as well, but in the Brazilian side, we had a long period of I'm sorry for my English because I'm thinking really in Portuguese. We had boarding schools and missions from the Catholic Church, which prohibited, I don't know if that, help me if you want, okay? They denied our traditional ceremonies as the Yurupari ceremonies that are the traditional ayahuasca sessions in our nation. In those boarding schools, our language, the Darceé, the Tukano language, and many other indigenous languages were prohibited. And they took really young children to try to incorporate them to the Western society, try to educate them, because until the 70s, here in Brazil, we were considered as incapable people under the tutel of the state. We weren't considered full citizens. It has been a long way to the Western world to recognize the humanity of indigenous nations. And as indigenous, it's always necessary to remember the indigenous nations all over the world are ancient civilizations. We are civilizations. We are as complex and contemporary civilizations as any other. We have science, we have technology, we have knowledge, cultures, and many manifestations. And so going finally into ayahuasca, that in my nation is kahpi, so I will say kahpi. Get used to it. It has many names. It has many indigenous names. Uni, Kamalampi, Shori, Huasca, Yahe, many names. We are more than 200 indigenous nations in the Amazon basin that has originally this medicine in our cultures. And for us, indigenous, the ayahuasca represents much more than just a medicine. It is actually the fountain, the origin of all of our knowledge. It is very often, if not always, because I can only speak by my nation, but what I have learned with the other relatives of the other people is that that vine, that medicine, is in the origin of our life, of our existence. So we are deeply related to that. And seeing the whole process of globalization, where today we have many people drinking ayahuasca, is really confused when we know that there are much more non-indigenous people drinking ayahuasca than indigenous. In the indigenous traditions, that medicine was always reserved to the shamans. Shaman is another word that has many names in many cultures. In our culture, we say kumu or yai, the jaguar shamans. And in my nation, it was mostly men. In other nations, there were women as well. But to be able to receive that kind of knowledge, it's required to have, first of all, a hereditary master, a grandfather or a grandmother to share this to the youth, to the next in the line. And it required not just only be part of a family that has guarded those knowledges for centuries, but also be to deserve it, to go through an intense process of learning, of diet, of isolation, of study, as in any other knowledge, as in any other science. To be a doctor, today you need to go to college and study for years and years and years. At least, I don't know, but I imagine like at least 10 years to be a good doctor, a good surgeon. And it's the same for indigenous nations. It's the same for the indigenous. Those that we recognize as shamans, which I am not, I am just a student. My grandfather, that is 110 years old, is a shaman. the shaman or the leader of our nation. But we recognize those healers by their living, by the goals they have achieved, by the example they lead. And so it's really interesting and kind of define to visualize what is called today as neo-shamanism as something that is really accessible to everyone. Because for not that is not supposed to be accessible, but in very often in the indigenous approach, to be a shaman, you really need discipline and dedication and an ethic in life. And the ethic, when I say that, is like how you behave toward the others. If you are a truthful person, if you lie or not, if you say always the truth. If you have a posture of well-being towards the community, if you are collaborating to the well-being to everyone, that is the ethics that we must follow in life, and that is really central in the indigenous communities. So in Brazil, we have a really interesting story as well with ayahuasca. That was the appearance of these contemporary religious churches that use ayahuasca as a central medicine. That is the Santo Daime, União do Vegetal, Barquinha, and many other groups that are appearing today. The story of those churches is part of our history because they actually appeared with an exchange that happened in a period, in a very specific place in the Acre. That is a state. I am from Amazonas. The state of Amazonas is upper in the north, and Acre is just below. And there were these men that were working in the slave work of rubber exploitation, and indigenous until quite the middle of the 20th century still worked in a very slavery way on those exploitation as well. And they met together. It was a story of poor people that were just trying to survive in the middle of the forest, and then happened the exchange. And all these visions and histories that made the Santo Daime and União do Vegetal came true. It was really interesting because as indigenous, we live a constant racism toward us. There is this idea that indigenous are just something from the past, and that if we are alive today, we need to continually try to fit into the Western society. Constantly, we are harassed by to not demonstrate our culture or our knowledge, and our spiritual culture, as we can say, but it is also scientific. Well, that kind of knowledge of the medicines of ayahuasca was really often demonized. We have centuries of demonization of our cultures. That's why we need to heed it for so long. And when that exchange happened, it arrived this really interesting thing that was the Christianization of ayahuasca. And then it went all over the world around. In the 70s, we had all this revolution. We are here gathering around the psychedelic liberty. In the 70s, we had a new age of interest towards the indigenous medicines, and I believe many of you that are following all the discussions here are following this path. And today, ayahuasca went really global. When we saw that, I say we, but when my father and uncles saw that, when the generation before me saw that, they were amazed. They were amazed because I can say that my father was like, my father went to a boarding school. My father went to all these experiences that the indigenous leaders faced during dictatorship times. He went into the national indigenous movement to create civic indigenous rights, to recognize our territories, our cultures, our identities. And that is the story of my uncles, of my elders. And when they realized that there were so many people, so many white people drinking ayahuasca, they didn't trust it at the beginning because we have been there. We have been through so many violence. But then the friendly people came and we began sharing it again. And they realized that it was possible to recover many illness in our society as well, because it's important to think about the approach that after 500 years of invasion, so-called colonization of our territories, we face a panorama of diseases in our societies. Without the right to our land, or without the recognition of our cultures, we are many times trapped into so many traffics: wood traffic, human traffic, alcoholism, suicides. The suicide rates in the indigenous nations are really high. And I am not talking just about Brazil. I am not talking just about my region in the High Black River in Brazil. This is the same story in Canada, in Australia, in many places. But when we got back to our medicines, to find the strength to recover, and not recover is not a good word, but ai meu Deus, I need to think in Portuguese, sorry. It's like relight, relight, like, you know, like putting wood on the fire. Something that was always with us, because as I was telling you, my grandfather is 110 years old. He is the last of his generation in the whole region. The shamans, the traditional shamans, are really few today. They're really old. They are survivors of many stories. And it took many courage to their sons to go to them and ask for learning. My father is a student of my grandfather. It needed courage, it needs discipline, it needs dedication, it needs the acknowledgement that we have the responsibility to keep the indigenous cultures alive. I am saying all that because the ayahuasca traditions the shamans, they are much more than healers. They are leaders of a nation. They are responsible for the continuity of our cultures. They are the ones that are to be the next grandfathers and grandmothers. They have the responsibility to share to the next generation of our peoples, so we can still go on. And so that was kind of an introduction because we must talk about the globalization and all that happens in this exchange. And we had an experience here in Brazil. We have a World Ayahuasca conference that happened in Rio Branco. It was really interesting. It was the first opportunity for many of us, the Indigenous, to see how large is the interest of the scientists, the academics, the anthropologists, the churches, and many corporations on this knowledge that is originary us. And after that, realizing something that we can call as cultural appropriation, or as the misuse of the medicines, that is how we understand that people are using something that is really sacred for us, but they are using it not every time in a very respectful way, in the way that we considered need to be respected. It's really complicated. So we gathered in an Indigenous Ayahuasca conference. We had already 3 editions. It's really hard to find the shamans and gather them, and someplace it can be really expensive to get an Indigenous from faraway territories to gather together. And it was a really interesting discussion. And it showed many worries about what has been done with our medicines. I wrote one time an article in the Radio Yandé. I am a coordinator of an Indigenous radio. If you want to join, here is the sign. It's radioyande.com. And I wrote an article one time about the japé, that is the tobacco snuff, about the tobacco itself. The tobacco is a really sacred medicine to, I believe, most of the indigenous peoples in the Americas, North to South America. And it was certainly the first medicine that was incorporated by the Western society in a way that it was turned from a medicine to poison. Because as in any medical science, if you get the dose of a medicine wrong, it can kill you. And today there are many people that are dying from the misuse of tobacco than healing themselves. That is just one big example of what can be done with a medicine when you just play with it and you don't really know it, or you don't have the assistance or the knowledge of centuries of research on how to use it. And that is the call that we do as Indigenous, to consider the point of view of our civilizations, on what has been done to these medicines. The tobacco is really sacred, as sacred as ayahuasca is, as central, as important as ayahuasca is in our societies. It opens many channels, if if you'd like to say that way. It opens an understanding, a side of the universe, and it opens also an ability of dealing with some energies, because our understanding is that our body is much more than what is physical. It's energy. We dialogue perfectly well with the Oriental medicines. We can talk about chakras, we can talk about acupuncture, that kind of stuff. We also have that. And when you mess with when you learn how to balance all that around you, you can also touch other people. There is a lot of people that drink ayahuasca and think they are going to some healing session or something, but that time to time found people that are actually messing with themselves. As an Indigenous woman, I heard a lot of news about sexual abuse, about people that lie and try to get money or fame. That is really complicated, because it's not the path, it's not the orientation of our shamans, it's not the orientation of our elders. And it's really sad. It's really sad. It's disgusting when we hear the news that that some men are serving medicine and just touching women. We have many women that go to ayahuasca ceremonies looking for healing of sexual abuse. That is something that cannot happen in any ways, and we must talk about it. It's really difficult to talk about it in healing sessions. It's really difficult to talk about it in the indigenous communities. We also go through that. But when it goes through what does spirituality mean to us, it's important to always remember what is ethic. I was just talking just before here. I was talking to two friends of mine. My brother, Boo, he is a shaman. He is doing like 5 years diet. So he is really, really high level. And I was also talking to a Hunikuin brother that is Ninawa Paidamata, very world-known shaman. And they were talking just about the importance of the discipline, of the self-respect towards ourselves and to the others. And so we hope that the messages of indigenous nations will be heard by those ones that have grown some interest about our medicines. We have several letters and public Travei. I'd like to ask Bia. Hein, Bia, como é que fala mesmo um negócio assim, manifestação, like manifests? We have like public letters that were written by indigenous chiefs, by the leaders, and denouncing those cases and bidding to have a good orientation to the well-being of everybody, and also because when the misuse of our medicines happens, those that are claimed guilty are the indigenous, once again. Those that are under the attack of racism, under the criminalization, are the indigenous. We pay really hard for the misuse of those that are not following a good ethical, a good path on being responsible, on sharing good thoughts, good feelings, on offering the well, on offering the respect. And so that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. This was really amazing, and I think a much needed to hear, especially on our side. So we'll get to some questions here. Again, if you asked a question, maybe just remind me. Sometimes the questions get lost from some of the previous questions that were asked in the other sessions. So here's one from Krista. What are your thoughts on indigenous spirit reincarnation?
Spirit what? Oh. I think we are having like a trouble of connection.
European settlers, like
okay. we are having like a troubleshoot with our technical team, and I am not having access to the questions. I don't know. Okay. I will open the questions by myself, and there are like top 12. Is there a path for non-therapist coaches, shamans here who currently work underground, know the medicine, are well trained in a non-traditional methods to eventually be able to work legally when I think that is a question for the other session. Yeah, I just read the comments. Okay, I just read the comments, and I was talking about how confused is for us sometimes to see non-indigenous dealing with ayahuasca and everything, but for sure the globalization is real, and we have many friends and partners that have really respect for the medicine, and when you take apart all that all these stereotypes, because the thing with shamanism is the stereotypes and the racism that people has these weird ideas about indigenous. If I take just this off, I was using it because it protects me, but if I take all this off, I am not cleaning my face, but I am just a human being. We are just as anybody else. We are not, hey, you're back. We are not I'm just answering by myself. I was saying that we are not like these fairy tales from the forest. We are real people. And in our real people societies, we have therapists. A shaman has to be is always a good therapist. In my nation, traditionally, when we drink kahpi, we don't spend all the night praying or singing. We spend most of the time talking about the experiences in life, talking about the process of learning, the pain, the sorrow, the sadness, all those processes that are human. And because we are in a constant process of learning, and that's why we gather in these medicine circles. So the first lesson is always to be humble, to be humble, and have the knowledge that we are not better than anyone, and that we are all in the same path together. So, for those ones that are not indigenous and are dealing with the medicine, all the respect to those that has a good um, behavior, a good discipline, a good respect to the others. Spirituality is not a matter of race, it's not a matter of religion. It doesn't matter where you live or which continent you are. In spirituality, we can just talk to the hearts of each other with no need of translation.
That's beautiful. Yeah, sorry about before. I guess my internet cut out, but yeah, thank you. That's really beautiful. I love just the humility part too, right? Humility, and we're human, right? So here's a question, and yeah, sorry, I was hearing you before, trying to navigate through some of these questions. They were from other sessions. So here's one. In Brazil, there are ceremonies that are organized by certain groups that hold ceremonies that are conducted by indigenous youth apprentices and not by shamans. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, something that is a really important discussions that we are having in the indigenous communities as well. Um, we happily have a generation full of new apprentices. We went through a hard time to get the youth interested to the traditional knowledge. And in many nations, I can say for the Tukano, I can say for what I know of the Hunikuin and Yawanawa and Ashaninka. Those that go outside of our village, they go with authorization and they go with guidance. Those are the ones that are recognized by us. And if you go to a doctor, you always need to have like reference. Where are you going? So you can look for the reference, and you can trust in the goodwill of those that are learning, not presenting themselves as shamans, because as I was saying, like my grandfather is a shaman, but he has like more than 100 years old. He's not going away. He's not going worldwide and visiting. He'd love to, for sure, but he is not leaving the village. The real shamans, the old ones, they are to be resting in a very safe place that is our homes. And so we divide and articulate the message to the new generations and to the other people. But we are all connected.
Awesome. There was a question here in the chat about ayahuasca tourism. How have the Tukano been impacted by ayahuasca tourism? And I'm wondering in negative or positive ways.
Mm-hmm. In the Tukano nation, we don't have that kind of tourism. That is something that really began in Brazil in the state of Acre. And I have really, really close personal relations, family relations with the Yawanawa nation. And so I have the authorization of this father of mine that is also the chief of the Yawanawa nation, Nishiwaka Yawanawa. And he was actually the first man who had this attention to look for alliance with the churches and with the academics and with the politicians of the Western world. And when he saw that the possibility of building the interest of like bringing the interest of white people on the indigenous culture to a kind of touristic session, like an open visit, that was a way that called the attention of the youth. Because the young ones that were in the village, they were like thinking of what they were teenagers. Like, you know, you say teenagers are the same in every culture. And when they saw the white folks like going like from other countries to pay attention on their grandfathers, then they realized that there was something to value as well. And so Nishiwaka was the first who created the first indigenous festival in the state of Acre. And after this experience in the Yawanawa nation, then the Hunikuin and other people around began having their own initiatives. In the Tukano, we don't have it because we are in another region, and as I was telling before, we are until today under the very large presence of the Catholic Church, and so it's a long path that we are working. I am personally working with it and with my family to recover the trust in our families. And but something that we are also seeing with this touristic activities is a risk of the misunderstanding of our cultures. And that leads to the commercialization of the medicines that is very much criticized, and it's important to criticize. But at the same time, it's important to consider that we are offering a medicine and that we have bills to pay in this Western world. We need to sustain, to have the structure for our villages, and so that is a very fair way to have this exchange of energy that can translate as well into money, with always paying attention of the very great responsibility. That is what we are offering, and where we are depositing all the efforts. Like these festivals are supposed to build the structure for our villages, education, health, security. That is the main objective of this kind of sharing. And of course, when you see young people, very unexperienced people, that may imagine that it is just an easy way of having money, we have many things to discuss as well. But I always recommend the initiatives that are under the care of leaders, not only spiritual leaders, but the leaders, the chiefs of the indigenous communities that are opening times to times an opportunity to receive visitors. Because indigenous villages, we are not open, we are not a park, we are not a zoo, we are just living our lives, and it's really weird to have visitors trying to take pictures or whatever, or talk to us. People need to live, they have children to take care, they need to go and plants and see lots of fruits, and what we need to eat, we have our stuff, we have our life. And so to be able to receive people with respect and without disturbing ourselves, it's really important to have like just one little week, just one little time where the whole community goes and pay attention to that, and then they go back to the daily life work.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. I know we're running out of time here, but there's one more question that we wanted to get to. I know Bia pointed this out and wanted me to ask this. Could you tell us something about Bolsonaro's policies and how they're affecting indigenous communities and the environment they protect?
Yes, of course, it's really important. I thank you for the opportunity of touching this subject here as well, because the present government is openly against the indigenous population in Brazil. He has a really severe speech of hate towards the indigenous, and is trying to dismantle all the indigenous rights that we have built during all the process of democratization of Brazil. That is to have our territories recognized and protected, granted by the law, that is seen as an originary right that goes just before all the other legislation that was built in this land. And so these territories are to be respected. And the actual government is trying to flexibilize all the laws of environmental care to have access to the agribusiness industry, the wood exploitation industry, the mining exploitation industry. So is the never-ending history of colonization, of the invasion of our territories, and we are standing up. We have one of the world references, indigenous movement, is the Brazilian indigenous movement. We are protecting the Amazons. We are protecting every other bio systems that are not just the Amazon. This is indigenous fight together. We are wanting to protect the waters, the air we breathe. We protect the seeds. We need to have good food, healthy food. We defend the good living. That is the main banner of the indigenous movements all over the world. And we are denouncing constantly the actual president, and in this moment of the COVID-19, we are in a very complicated situation because we are the group that has less access to health care, and the COVID is already getting to our territories. We already lost some warriors. The first to die was a really young 15 years old Yanomami. That is a very isolated nation in the forest. We also lost our health professionals. We lost one in the state of Amazonas. He was a doctor. He was a medicine that was supposed to be taking care of the indigenous health, and he died of COVID. And so we are doing crowdfundings to try to get people some food or some medical resources to survive this epidemic. Because for us, we know that it is not the first time that we are facing that kind of disease, but just because of it, because we know that can be an ethnocide, that can be a genocide. One more time to our nations, one more time. And we know that we are together, that the world is going through this together. And we hope that after this is past, that society can renew in a new way of respect and well living to the whole humanity, that we learn the lesson on respecting diversity, on respecting all the territories, on respecting all the nations, on not needing to explore the others or the land of the others to think that you are going to be wealth, rich, and fine. That is not health. So that's it. Thank you for the opportunity. Really.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us and sharing everything. I mean, it's wonderful to hear all these perspectives and much needed. So anything that you want to close with really quick?
Yes, for those that want to support the indigenous movement, I'd say to go and look for the APIB. APIB is the Articulation of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil. You can set the site. The website is like apib.org, and they are crowdfunding to help many indigenous communities to go through this. And they are also the ones that are responsible to go to the juridical international processes to guarantee our rights, our indigenous rights. And with all of our rights, we are protecting the land that is our mother, that is our family. So that's it. And
how do you spell that? Somebody in the chat just asked about how to spell that website. Maybe somebody just dropped it in there. Nope. Okay. Yeah, people dropped it in there. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for this. And
me as well. I have my website. You can follow me on Instagram and whatever.
Awesome. And just a reminder for folks, there's going to be a little break and then reconvening on track 1 at 9:20 p.m. Eastern time, 6:20 Pacific time. So thanks, everybody. Thank you, Daiara, for joining us, and we'll catch you at the on track 1 at 9:20, 6:20. So thanks, everybody.